Okay. Are we on? Can everyone hear me? Great. Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon for what promises to be a really enriching and illuminating conversation. My name is Sarah Mackay and I am the Assistant Curator of Works on Paper here at the Fine Arts Museums. And I'm going to be moderating our talk, Botticelli to Balanchine, The Renaissance of Dance. So as the title suggests, this talk is going to be about the interconnectedness of dance and fine art. And we're going to be looking at those links through the works of two leading figures within their own respective disciplines. First, Sandro Botticelli, who was a towering figure in the 15th century, Italian Renaissance specifically in Florence, and George Balanchine, who was the first and one of the most significant American ballet choreographers. I am joined today on stage by Furio Rinaldi, who is our acting head of the department and our curator of Works on Paper. And perhaps more importantly today, he is the curator of Botticelli Drawings. So just to speak a little bit about the show, for anyone who hasn't been through the galleries, this is the first ever exhibition dedicated to Botticelli's graphic work, so his drawings specifically, and it covers the development of his style and his technique, moving from his time under Fra Filippo Lippi when he was a pupil in Lippi's workshop, up through the flourishing of Botticelli's own career when he's running his own workshop, and then to the end of his life with the rise and then the decline of Girolamo Savonarola in Florence, and then we get to Botticelli's death about 12 years later. This show has 39 lenders, so it is a fantastic opportunity to see so many works of art that have never come to the United States and may never come again. So I really encourage you to take some time, go through the show once, go through the show twice, because it's a really rare opportunity. So congratulations for you. I'm also joined on stage with Tamara Rojo. Tamara Rojo is the artistic director of San Francisco Ballet, which she joined in 2022. And before joining SFB, she had an illustrious 30-year career as a classical ballet dancer. She was a principal dancer with English National Ballet, as well as the Royal Ballet in London. And she danced numerous leading roles in many full-length ballets by George Balanchine, but also Jerome Robbins, as well as Kenneth MacMillan, who is an esteemed choreographer in England. She's been awarded numerous accolades for her performance and her work in ballet. And having been a classical ballet dancer myself, and having danced at a very kind of low professional level, I watched numerous videos of you when I was training, Tamara, and you were an idol to me. You were a technician and an absolutely beautiful performer, so I'm honored to be here on stage with you today. So welcome, and thank you both for joining me. So Furio, I thought we'd start with you, and let's get into the PowerPoint, excuse me. And we'll start with the sections of the exhibition, if we can get moving here. Give me 1 minute. Rich, there we go, great, perfect. So if you've made your way through the exhibition, one of the first things you notice is that the section titles have these very distinct names. You open with prelude, you get grace, harmony, rhythm, finale. A lot of terms that for me make me think of musicality, they make me think of the aesthetics in the Renaissance, but also specifically dance. Could you start off by talking a bit about where those section titles come from and perhaps how they relate to this connection you see between Botticelli's work and dance in the period?
Yes, it's from this detail that you see from the beautiful Mystic Nativity on loan from the National Gallery in London, you can see a very obvious interest of Botticelli for dance and music. As I was conceptualizing the exhibition, I was very much trying to look for inspiration and thoughts and reflections of Botticelli's other than, outside of the art history world.
Sure.
And as I was researching and reading, I came across so many references of Botticelli's in the world of ballet. He was beloved by many famous dancers, Anna Pavlova, Isadora Duncan, but choreographers. We will see them today. And I thought that is, in fact, if you look at the Primavera or if you look at details from these other paintings, there's certainly something extremely rhythmic and musical about Botticelli's art, and that is most evident in his drawings. I think both are about lines. In fact, there's a rhythmic elegance in the graphic articulation of Botticelli's idea. The beautiful figures that he portrayed, they always have an expressive and ornamental tendency and purpose, I would say. And also the way he organizes these figures within the larger arrangement of the space is very much the work of a choreographer. And I was very much inspired by Olivia Powell's dissertation, 2012 dissertation, where she basically brings a choreographic approach in Renaissance art, and how Renaissance art is very much inspired by dance of that time.
Sure.
So that is how the idea came together. And when Tamara arrived to San Francisco, I know that you loved art, and in London you were often seen by colleagues at the museums there. And as she was putting on stage, Balanchine's Midsummer's Night's Dream, which is inspired by Botticelli's Primavera, it all came together very nicely.
Perfect. All right, so then thinking a bit about Botticelli and this relationship that he had to dance, can you tell us a bit about the status of dance in Renaissance Florence in the 15th century? Kind of its cultural significance.
Yes, so I'm not a dance historian, but through art, we have so many evidences and clues of what dance was and was used at the time. It is a moment of profound change for the art of dance. We have here a detail from the so-called Bible of Borso d'Este. It was the ruler of Ferrara, and you see it's a fantastic, portrayal of dance in a courtyard. It is a moment where, so dance, of course, is an expression of the social values of the community of the different Italian courts, and it becomes progressively and increasingly present in all the social functions, whether there are festivities, religious festivities, political ones, marriages, of course, in a regulated way as it wasn't before. And this, of course, dances occurred both in the public spaces of the piazze, of the the civic spaces, and in homes. On top of that, concurrently, dance becomes part of the education of the courtier at the time. So again, as an expression of the social, values of a certain society, the ideal courtier was supposed to be able to join the dance and know the choreography and know the steps. So it becomes from spectator to actual performer. And so the figure of the ballet teacher, the ballet master, the maestro di balletto, it becomes increasingly present in the Italian courts because it dictates, the timings of the dance, the choreographies, and for the first time in the middle of the 15th century, we have the first dance treatises. Treatises, yes. As this one by Guglielmo Ebreo from Ferrara, which is one of the most important ones of the three that are produced and written in Italy at the time. We're around 1460s, 1450s, 1460s, so exactly the time where Botticelli starts his career as an artist. And these treatises are incredibly important because they inform us not only of the stylistic and technical elements of the dance of the time, they also report some music, typologies of dances, and how dance, in fact, becomes not only it's useful not only for the body or the athleticism, not only for its athletic quality, so to speak, but for the mind, in a constant dialogue between body and soul that is typical of the classical sources, which are, reprised and restudied in the Italian Renaissance. So these treatises are incredibly important, and also, yes, absolutely, artists see in dance some sort of a getaway to understand the classical world. We see here a relief at the top from the Louvre that was rediscovered only in the 16th century, but you can see how this kind of imagery of dancing scenes were reprised by Renaissance artists. We have the print from our collection by Mantegna, very important. So the dance was seen really as a getaway to understand the classical world, the Roman and Greek world, where dance had an incredibly important role, you know, as an expression of the religion and the culture of the time.
Amazing. So then if we're kind of learning a bit about the culture at the time, let's think some about, I guess, the artists around Botticelli. So when you first start the exhibition, you enter into a gallery that is dedicated, as I mentioned before, to Fra Filippo Lippi, who was the teacher of Botticelli. And I wonder for you if you feel that this influence of dance on Botticelli's work is coming through in the works of other artists at the period, especially, for instance, Fra Filippo Lippi.
Absolutely. So in the first room you see of the exhibition, you see how Botticelli was deeply, influenced and trained by his teacher, Fra Filippo Lippi, especially, in the workshop of Prato. This is a town, north of Florence. There's a very important cathedral, and Fra Filippo was entrusted with the commission of these large frescoes in the, main chapel of the cathedral. And one of the most important scenes, certainly one that was incredibly celebrated and admired up to the 19th century, is the banquet of Herod, where you see the famous dance of Salome. So these are, of course, the stories of St. John the Baptist, and this is the moment of the beheading. Salome's dance was a specific aspect of this painting that was particularly admired. And in the incredible vitality and realism of Salome's, I think it shows direct interest and inspiration of Fra Filippo for the dance of that time. Again, a dance that reenacts or it's inspired by classical dance, but at the same time actualized in a, what it's a modern banquet. I think we're seeing what would have been really a Florentine feast at the time. Yeah. So this is, if you think that this is the first work that Botticelli was working, on as a pupil, I think dance becomes really embedded in his visual imagery right from the beginning.
Sure. And don't worry, Tamara, I'm getting to you soon.
I'm enjoying this very much.
We all are. So this is a painting that probably many of us are familiar with. This is Botticelli's Primavera, which was painted somewhere between 1480 and 1482. And it is remarkable for many reasons. And one of those is that this is really the first instance that we get a mythological painting that isn't rooted in a distinct narrative. So this isn't a scene from the Aeneid, for instance. Instead, what we have here are numerous figures that art historians have been able to identify over time, but kind of put together in a composition that would have had allegorical significance to the owner of the painting and to specifically the circle around the Medici at the time. This was a painting that we believe was owned by Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, who was the brother of Giovanni de' Medici and the cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent. And so it is, it had specific cultural significance then. But what I think is so interesting for this purpose is specifically some of the individual figures, their poses, the lines of the body. So I'll quickly identify them, and then Furio, if you could talk a bit about kind of Botticelli's study of the male nude body and his draftsmanship of figures and how you feel it relates to dance a bit. And Tamara, I think it would be fantastic if you also want to chime in if you see any kind of relationships as well. So just going through the composition, we have Mercury all the way at left, we have the three Graces, then we have Venus, and above her, Amor, or Cupid. Here we have Flora. And then we have Zephyr, the god of the west wind, with Chloris, it is believed. And so then let's start, I think, with maybe Mercury. Furio, if you can tell a bit about the drawings.
If you can go back just one slide.
Sure.
You understand exactly why this painting was so much beloved by choreographers and dancers. It's essentially a ballet, You have a sequence of these 9 figures and on a background that it's essentially flat, There's not much perspective of depth. It's really like a stage. So it's not, and they're all, on the kind of, on the same level. Yes, you have the Venus, that it's a little bit recessed, but we're really witnessing a performance. I think it's truly the only key to understand that the from a compositional standpoint, this celebrated painting is true dance. And in fact, I want to read so I'm reading from an interview that Balanchine gave to Salomon Volkov. This is from a 1981 book called Balanchine Tchaikovsky. Very interesting. This is a moment where Balanchine speaks about him as a young dancer from the troupe of Sergei Diaghilev in the Ballet Russe. So it was like in the early 1900s with him, and they are traveling to Florence. And I quote, Diaghilev not only helped me to understand the subtleties of Stravinsky's music, he also explained me painting too. He opened my eyes to Botticelli. We were in Florence together. Diaghilev led me to the Uffizi Gallery, sat me in front of Botticelli's La Primavera, and said, look at it. Then he went off with Lifar and Concho, which are two dancers from the same company, to have lunch. It wasn't very nice on his part. When Diaghilev returned to the Uffizi, full, I was sitting in front of the Botticelli, hungry and angry. Diaghilev asked me, well, what do you understand of it, of the painting? And Balanchine said, of course, I've seen, Of course, I had seen that La Primavera was a wonderful painting, but I was angry at Diaghilev. Lifar and Concho were his favorites, and he dressed them well and fed them well, and of course, they played of being great connoisseurs of art. To spite Diaghilev, I said I didn't understand a thing. Well, a painting like any other, so what? Nothing special. Diaghilev lost his temper. But actually, I had liked Botticelli very much, and his Primavera stayed with me for my whole life. In fact, inspirations from directly sourced from La Primavera can be seen in earliest work of Balanchine of Serenade, and of course in Midsummer's Night Dream. But getting back to your question, to kind of Botticelli, the choreographer, so to speak, I want to focus on the study of one figure. I think he operates in a way where the body needs to move with a purpose and with, of course, an elegant articulation. And in the apparently simple, and natural pose of the Mercury, we see, in fact, a lot of study and refinement of the figural aspects of the nude. All the drawings that I'm showing, of course, are in display in the exhibition, which is pretty great to have all the preparatory drawings for this incredible painting. So he used two workshop assistants, or probably the same one with a different hairdo, posing for him, like leaning on the wall on a staff to keep the muscular tension of the figure, or with his arm on his hip to give a more elegant line. And I think the final figure is a combination of these two drawings. If we can see next, the inspiration is certainly from a direct observation of reality and his assistants, his models, but also it's a classical inspiration. I said that Renaissance Florence, marks a revival in interest for Greek and Roman art, and so you can clearly see it for Botticelli. Classical art, but also contemporary art. One of the drawings, which ultimately will be used to define the beautiful Mercury Apollo in the Primavera, was certainly inspired by Verrocchio's David, which in Florence at the time became kind of the quintessential reference for the portrayal of the semi-nude, the male semi-nude. And again, you can see some sort of elegance and a ballet-like position in that figure.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we look at these, I think immediately of a prince arriving on stage. You have the contrapposto, so he looks comfortable, but he's also kind of conveying a presence when he's on stage, I think. And you get that very much in these drawings, specifically for Mercury, I'd say.
So there you go.
And so all of them together.
And the head is very important, of course, for ballet. We usually focus on feet and hands and but the upper body and the position of the head is so important, and you can see the attention that Botticelli puts into this, with studying just exclusively and carefully the expression and the position of the head. And
what we will call epaulement,
yes,
because it's the relationship of the shoulders towards the head and the torso, which tends to be a contradiction. The hip is going in one direction and the torso is rotating to create that three-dimensional figure that is very much like the painting.
And you know, one interesting thing about this specific drawing, it was, although it was recognized as by Botticelli for a long time, it was just recently, 10 years ago, it was associated with Mercury in the Primavera, because the way it was mounted in the British Museum, the face was turned down, was kind of rotated 30 degrees to the left, and so the figure was looking down, but a scholar, Lorenza Melli in Florence, she rotated the drawing and she understood, in fact, it's preparatory for the face of Mercury. So the position, in fact, was really key to understanding the function of this drawing.
And the light, especially as well. That's
Yes.
something also you get with épaulement, is the light is shining on the cheek. It's all about the musculature and the curvature of the body. So, yep, very important here as well. Feet. So, being a former ballet dancer, one of the first things that I always look at when I walk through an exhibition, this one, but also many others, is the feet. And I was talking to Furio about this in the past, but for me, feet are great communicators. It's something that my ballet teacher taught me, but it's the way that you move the feet, it's the way that you raise on élevé, it's the slowness, the speed, you know, it depends on what step it is. Feet say a whole lot in ballet and also in paintings. And so before we kind of get into the significance of feet to your research, Furio, because they were, Tamara, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about some of the positions that we see, specifically with the three graces in this painting, which are distinctly balletic and I think rooted in particular moments in time as well.
I mean,
Beautiful
feet. Very beautiful feet. Not really like ballerina feet, but yeah.
Take that, Botticelli.
No, I mean, ballerina feet are not as beautiful. But so if you see, like the first figure is in relevé, is what we call, and you have an arch foot, which is very much like a ballet dancer foot. She's kind of in a fourth, although it's turned in. Today we would have rotated that to create a more turnout. The other one you could say is in like a back tendu, but the one that interests me the most is the third one, because this is a position that classical ballet used to use a lot, but is somewhat lost today. It's a resting position, is when you're resting and looking somewhere else, when there's action somewhere and you don't have choreography and you're just waiting or resting. Today that has been elongated into like a full tendu or a coupe behind, partially because dancers today have such physical abilities, such range of movements, such physicality that they want to show their full range. So they will show their instep, they will show the turnout, they will show the tendu, they will show the line of the stretched knee. But I do love this position, and there was someone that was very famous for doing this exquisitely, which was Margot Fonteyn. And Margot Fonteyn, I mean, in England they will call this the Margot pose, because she would constantly be on the stage in that kind of relaxed turning of the knee, relaxed, you know, the standing leg is turned out, but the other leg is slightly turned in, the knee is slightly bent, and the foot is not stretched, it's just slightly resting on the kind of the bunion or the big toe, right, in a demi point, but it has that beautiful curve. It produces a beautiful curve of the body because you can sit on the hip slightly and then you can turn the body against that hip and use the épaulement. It's a very classical position as a sculpture, and she used it a lot in Marguerite and Armand, which we'll be doing also in the spring, but we no longer use it. Most of us, even myself included, I've never managed to make it look that good, but also we tend to stand in a tendu to show, you know, our physiognomy more. So it's a shame because exactly, it's such a beautiful pose and it's so human, but also so elegant.
So you think the simplicity of it...
It's false simplicity. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly complex because things are moving, are rotating within yourself. You know, parts of you are going one way and parts of you are going into a different way. It's the simplicity of classicism, which is not simple at all.
So interesting. So as we were preparing, this talk, we put together all the feet that we could find. And when we came into this one, for which we have also some drawings, in the exhibition, Tamara said, "Stop! That is the Margot Fontaine, position."
Yes.
And you admitted you didn't know that it was also shown in paintings, and
No.
It's interesting that it goes so way back in a way,
Yeah.
and of course, again, it's deeply rooted in study, but because it's so complex, I think Botticelli studied it and refined it and fine-tuned it so many times. This is, I don't know if it's the same position, but
Yes.
that is for the birth of Venus.
Yes.
So we're looking at the feet of Venus on top of the shell in the famous painting.
I think it's interesting that it seems so natural when we look at it, but I invite you all at the end to try it. Just stand there like that, looking like Venus. It's not easy at all.
It's not easy. And if you go back 1 second, to the right, there's a drawing in the exhibition. Is the drawing for the Minerva, that it's on the back of the great portrait of Simonetta Vespucci. And the feet are exactly like that. So it becomes almost a pattern, I think, again, using drawing as a reference to replicate, ideas. And once he found that, perfect position, he put it both in the Primavera, Birth of Venus, and elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's a position that I feel is incredibly light, but also incredibly stable. It kind of conveys a sense of upcoming movement, but also stability. So it's perfect in dance, but it also, I think it really sits beautifully in many of these paintings. So moving on to more feet. Furio, I know in your research, feet were also particularly important for some of the attributions that you made. For any of you who don't know, this exhibition includes numerous new attributions to Botticelli that were made by Furio throughout his research for the show. So can you talk a little bit about the feet and how they helped with the attributions? And I can skip to the next slide if these are...
It's just, like we can appreciate the attention that Botticelli, an artist of his time, put into the positioning and definition of the feet. I think they're really exquisite. There's a very early connoisseur, late 19th century, early 20th century connoisseur, Giovanni Morelli, who was making great attributions and identifying artists. These are in the heroic days of art history when, people were trying to reestablish the corpus of different painters. And he said, you have to look at extremities to make attributions and to recognize the distinctive style of an artist. You have to look at the nails, you have to look at the feet, you have to look at the ears, you have to look at this detail because those never change. The position, the overall composition, the body can change and the artist can vary the style, for these things, but he always keeps some sort of a signature in the details. And I think looking at Botticelli's drawings and how he represented feet, there is in fact, continuity.
And I would say that's exactly the same for ballet, I would say sometimes. If you show me a picture of certain dancers' feet, I'll be able to identify, I know who that ballerina is, I know it's Marianella. Certain feet, not every single set of feet, but there are some dancers, exceptional feet and exceptional use of feet that you can really identify an individual ballerina, I think.
Yeah.
So feet were, as you said, were kind of one of the very important aspects that helped me in the identification of a drawing related to this painting. This is the beautiful Annunciation of the Virgin on loan from Glasgow. It's one of my favorite paintings in the exhibition because also very unusual. You have the historical, religious event of the Annunciation, but Botticelli has set it into a contemporary Florentine palace. Although the architecture seems very classical and antique, this was exactly the contemporary architecture going on in Florence in the end of the 1400s. And so again, I think it's a sort of in a way, a performative representation more than a real depiction of the Annunciation. So the two figures, the two actors are almost, acting in a contemporary stage. But going back to the feet, so the next slide, I think, yes, you see we have this very distinctive pose with, one foot, pointing onward and the other one, just in a tendu, in fact, to the back. And this is exactly the pose of the feet in the drawing in the Uffizi, which was unattributed, and it's presented here with a new attribution to Sandro Botticelli. Not just this detail, but it was one of the evidence that, together with the style, with the technique, with the history of the drawing and the provenance, of course, it's from the Uffizi, that helped corroborating, so to speak, the attribution of the drawing to Botticelli.
And so one more foot, I think that's particularly important.
This is just for fun. So I show, so this is Botticelli's largest altarpiece he ever produced. Also is the one for which he received the most money. In the exhibition, we have the preparatory drawing for it, for the upper part of the coronation of the Virgin. So this is a career high for Botticelli, many, many figures. And there is a detail that it really always makes me laugh, that clearly he changed the position of a foot. It was, lower, and then, he covered it with the, the blue paint, and he redid it, upper, and we were wondering why. I think, there's an element of elegance. Of course, it looks better like that, but also it looked like the feet was kicking the head of the of Saint Ambrose. So it's better to really erase this, and probably the patron got really upset because clearly it's a last-minute revision and change.
Excellent. So now that we have gotten all the way down to the feet, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the entire composition of one of Botticelli's best-known paintings, The Mystic Nativity. This painting was made in 1502. It is the only signed work by Sandro Botticelli that we have today, and it, again, kind of happens at that moment of cultural change in Florence when Fra Girolamo Savonarola, God at that time, had just come into Florence and since been executed, but really kind of encouraged this religiosity that entirely shifted Florence out of this kind of moment of flourishing and celebration of the arts. So this is a very particular and interesting composition for you, and I'd love to hear how you feel this in particular relates to the idea of maybe choreography or putting together the composition.
So this is a painting that Tamara knows well, also because it's from London, from the National Gallery, and if you hear the audio guide that we have for the exhibition, Tamara very kindly did the piece on this very painting because I think it's the one where the idea of choreography, of choreographing and organizing the movement on so many levels very much come into play. I don't know if we want to say something about this specific painting, but
I mean, like you said, is almost like a ballet. You see the corps de ballet, if you want to call it that, on top, the angels, and that specific structure is actually something that is very similar to the Midsummer Night's Dreams fairies. When they're dancing together, they link hands. It's something that Balanchine used very often. He would choreograph lines of women with hands linked that then would develop into more complicated patterns by going in and out of that kind of circle or diagonals. Then below you have the center figure, like the pas de deux or the pas de trois in this case, of course. And then you have the three wise men to the side, which in this case they're quite anonymous.
Sorry, yes, here they are.
Yes, they don't seem to be particularly important, certainly not next to the great figure of Mary, who is the biggest.
Yeah, it's really, the scale of this figure is larger than anything else, which is what makes this painting very interesting and unique. Botticelli was hailed and appreciated as for the perfection of his figure, for the proportions, for the harmonic proportion of the figures, and then you have these paintings where clearly, the main character is much bigger than anything else. And that's exactly what he wanted to do. It's not a mistake. He wanted to convey the importance of the Virgin, the kind of salvific role of the Virgin for humanity by making her bigger, overwhelmingly, kind of bigger and overarching over the Jesus. It is a painting that is extremely telling of Botticelli's new style and new trajectories that put him at odds with the main trajectory of the Florentine Renaissance, which is considered always, the big achievement in perspective, in proportions, in the anatomical accuracy. Well, Botticelli went in a completely different direction and, paid the price for it because, in fact, after this painting, his career is very much in decline. we have this moment of crisis, but I think it's, in fact, as you see from the exhibition, it's one of the most exciting, expressive, experimental phases of his career. But getting back to the choreography, exactly, so we have this kind of 3 different layers that are animated and actioned at the same time. So the angels at the top, the roundelay at the top, the central scene, and then these 3 groups of embracing figures, which are very kind of mysterious. The general interpretation of this is that the 3 angels are the 3 cardinal virtues, and they have the colors of the virtues, in fact, and they're embracing the souls, the human souls that are kind of rising from the ground. In fact, you can see them standing up, always, more erect if you go from right to left. And the vices, the 7 vices, are escaping. So you have the little, 7 devils that are kind of getting back into the cracks of the ground. So a lot of movement, and just like the Primavera, I think this is certainly a painting that was inspired by, more than dance or ballet, from the holy representations. So this kind of religious performances that were done to reenact central moments, pivotal moments from the holy scriptures. And you have that kind of feverish sense of performance that the actors were known for. And I think that is very much the inspiration behind this painting.
Okay. So now that we've kind of walked through all of these works by Botticelli, I wanted to switch over specifically to you, Tamara, so we can talk about A Midsummer Night's Dream, because that is one of the many performances that will be coming up next year in 2024 at San Francisco Ballet, and it is very related specifically to Botticelli and a few of his paintings and his art. A Midsummer Night's Dream is George Balanchine's first full-length classical ballet, and it premiered in 1962, so I have just included a couple images up here so you get a sense of what it looked like when it was first performed on stage. You have Melissa Hayden dancing with Edward Villella as the role of Titania, and again, Melissa Hayden as Titania over on the left. But before we get specifically into all of the nitty-gritty parts of the ballet, let's talk a bit about George Balanchine. Can you tell us a little bit about who he was and why he is such an important choreographer within kind of the history of American ballet in particular?
So George Balanchine was Russian-born choreographer. He studied ballet at the Vaganova Academy, which was the school of the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. Against his will, it was very much his mother who put him there as a way of giving him a future. He also studied music, and I think that's very key to his choreographic language, because he was really almost first and foremost a musician. Right. And the way he choreographed was to use the body as an instrument. And one of the things he said that I think really illustrates his approach to choreography was hear the dance, see the music. And that's how he choreographed. He used the human body as just another instrument of the orchestra. So he was really an extraordinarily gifted choreographer. He left Russia and joined the Ballet Russe de Diaghilev, where he learned a lot about choreography. He created some masterpieces for them already, like Apollo, based on Greek mythology, among other things. And then he made his way, he also worked and lived in Germany, and then he made his way to New York, where he created the what we know today as New York City Ballet and also the School of American Ballet. And I think what was quite extraordinary for him, being so deeply Russian, was that he was also deeply patriotic American. And he was determined to find the choreographic language of what he considered to be obviously the best country in the world, a country of courage, of freedom, of creativity, where jazz was everywhere, where creativity was everywhere, risk, speed. And so he defined choreography for the American ballet scene, in that he was able to bring influences from American music, American composers, American performing arts, American design, every aspect of American culture into the choreographic language, and also tear down all of the over-exaggerated aspects of some of the classical repertoire that he had left behind in St. Petersburg under Petit Pas, and strip down all of the design elements to do like an ode to the body, to the physicality of these American bodies that he adored. And so he actually became an ambassador, and he convinced the government for for New York City Ballet to be the ambassador of the arts. They famously traveled to Russia as ambassador of America and as an example of the superiority of the American arts and the superiority of the American ballet creativity to the Soviet Union. So he really, that's why I think he's defined as an American choreographer. And every choreographer after that has been inspired and influenced by his language.
I love what you said about the artistry and the simplicity, you know, but his first ballet, as Midsummer's Night's Dream, is still at the cusp of this change. I would say you still have the very artistic component that was coming from the Russia, from the Ballet Russe.
Yes.
And what I love about this early ballet is the very strong Renaissance inspiration. You mentioned Apollo, we will now see Midsummer's Night's Dream. Before that, we had Bacchus and Ariadne, which I'm showing here. They have the famous photo, beautiful photo by Irving Penn, costumes designed by Corrado Cagli. There's an exhibition on him in New York right now at the Center for Italian Modern Art. And the ballet was directly sourced and inspired by Lorenzo the Magnificent poem on Bacchus and Ariadne, one of his most famous composition. It was in fact a ballata, was meant to be sang and danced at the same time. And so there's this interesting passion for the Italian Renaissance for his early ballet.
Yes, so talking about a passion for the Italian Renaissance, and I'm sorry to skip through a few slides here, but we had to make our way back. If we're going to talk about George Balanchine, the other dancer that is very significant to talk about is Isadora Duncan, who was a pioneering modern dancer who even precluded or was before George Balanchine. And she has a recorded interest specifically in Sandro Botticelli. If you read her autobiography, I'll read a snippet in a moment, but she records her feelings in front of the Primavera, and it's said that her family actually had a print of the Primavera in their home that traveled with them to all of their different homes. So this is Isadora Duncan speaking about her time in front of the Primavera when it was at the Accademia in Florence between 1805 and 1915, I believe. And she writes, "I sat for hours before this picture. I was enamored of it. A nice old guardian brought me a stool, and I viewed my adoration with kindly interest. I sat there until I actually saw the flowers growing, the naked feet dancing, the bodies swaying. Until the messenger of joy came to me, and I thought, I will dance this picture and give to others this message of love, spring, procreation of life, which have been given to me with such anguish. I will give to them through the dance such ecstasy." So the painting was obviously very important for her, and you see it in the use of her costumes and the style of movement that she practices. Can you talk a bit about Isadora Duncan and why she was so significant for paving the way even for Balanchine?
So Isadora Duncan was born here in San Francisco. She was, I think for me, like you say, a revolutionary artist, but she was consistently underestimated, especially by the ballet world. She was made fun of very, very often. But she was a real profound artist, and she was particularly obsessed with the Greek tradition and the place of dance in Greek culture, and therefore she had a lot in common with the Renaissance view about Roman and Greek culture. She wanted to be in service of gods or nature through dance. She was like a goddess of dance. That's what she wanted to find. And because of that, she really studied seriously. She studied philosophy and history and Greek history and Greek art and music in a way that, I think gave her a lot more importance to her work than what ballet wanted to recognize at the time, because she did not have She did not agree with classical training. She did have it, but she didn't want to use it. She thought that ballet needed to be more in coordination with humanity and human nature and with the Greek tradition and the Greek proportions. She also was barely dressed when she performed. She famously danced almost naked, which created huge scandal, but that's because she dressed herself as one of those Greek dance kind of priestess, yeah. And she also, and more importantly, was one of the first artists, if not the first, to use what we will call serious music for her choreography. Before that, most choreography was made on music specifically created for ballet. In some cases, like, with the partnership of Petipa with Tchaikovsky and Glazunov, that was great because those two composers were extraordinary. But in some cases, that was quite unfortunate in that many ballets would just be a cut and paste of random pieces of music that were done to the millisecond of what the choreographer requested. They would say, I want 10 minutes of adagio, 3 minutes of quick battery, 2 minutes of this, one solo for the man, 1 minute 50, And so it can actually become quite poor musical score. However, Isadora never did that. She used Brahms and she used Chopin for her own performances. And that had a huge impact, especially when she traveled to Russia in 1905. She was seen performed by Fokine and by Diaghilev. And I believe that without that performance, Fokine would have never had the courage to use Chopin to create Chopiniana, which is considered to be the first abstract ballet ever created. And Chopiniana was done for the school of the Vaganova Academy, the Mariinsky company. But it was one of the first pieces that Ballet Russe de Diaghilev took on tour when they went to Paris. And it changed the language of ballet in that it did not have a clear narrative. It was about three muses and a poet, so it was kind of close to the Renaissance or the Greek kind of arts. The dresses were not the classical tutu, but they were the soft romantic tutu. And like I said, from then on, all or most of the works that Diaghilev produced with Fokine, with Massin, and therefore with Balanchine were with serious music, either serious commissioned scores like Stravinsky, right, or a score that already existed but that was considered not to be a ballet or a dance score. So for me, without Isadora, we wouldn't have Balanchine.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
And Fokine, also a big Botticelli, fan of Botticelli. I think all of them saw him as a gateway to understand ballet in the classical antiquity, in the classical world. You know, the Renaissance scene as kind of a filter to something that, was more, remote from a more ancient past.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think many of them kind of went through the same Balanchine task of sit in front of this painting and learn from it. I think Fokine did as well. So, yes. So these are. Before we move on to the next topic, I wanted to just mention that these are 3 drawings that are in our theater and dance collection. We have a renowned collection of theater and dance drawings that started with 2 gifts from one of the co-founders of the Legion of Honor, Alma de Bretteville Speckles, in 1959 and 1962. And so these drawings come from that collection, which really looks at now really the history of dance, but has its strengths specifically in actually the period of the Ballet Russe. So kind of moving on from Isadora, before we get into exactly the relationship between Botticelli and Balanchine with Midsummer Night's Dream, can you just tell everyone in the audience kind of a brief overview of A Midsummer Night's Dream, the story at least?
I can't.
You can't?
It's so complicated. It is basically based on Shakespeare's 5-act play, but Balanchine reduced it to 2 acts. So we start the ballet already in the dream section, and I think if you read the fantastic biography by Jennifer Homans, Mr. B, you realize that Balanchine was quite obsessed with dreams and reality. What is real? What is perceived to be real? Who are you? Who is your reality? He he compared Shakespeare to a Sufist philosopher, and he was very interested himself in Sufism. So Balanchine reduces the 5 acts to 2 acts. So we start already in Titania and Oberon's confrontation over the child. And then he introduces what the characters of the previous act, the court characters, who, well, Shakespeare was writing Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet at the same time. So the cross lovers are actually the same kind of story as Romeo and Juliet. So he introduces, Balanchine introduces those 2 cross lovers narratives kind of as a almost comedic plot to get you from one aspect of the dramatic arc of Titania and Oberon and the child and Puck, from one thing to another. And then he does end the second act in the court, in the wedding, the final wedding, and all ends well. Unlike most of Shakespeare's plays. So that's kind of the arc, but it is a really complex story, although Balanchine does a great job of telling the story very well.
Sure. So now that we know a little bit about the story, let's talk about the similarities between the set, but also the choreography in Balanchine's Midsummer Night's Dream, and how it relates to 2 of Botticelli's paintings. Here, obviously, the Venus. This is a painting from 1490, one of the very few paintings by Botticelli that is actually on canvas. And once again, a painting that is, mythological and allegorical in subject, but difficult to interpret. We, again, have been able to identify the figures, but the story being told is still a little bit difficult for art historians. It's probably the arrival of Venus, we think, maybe to Cyprus. Am I correct, Furio?
It's complex for us, but for the people that was painted for, it was absolutely clear. And it's all about a dialogue between the literary sources and representation. So a lot, like ballet, like the position that you said, it's been lost. The meaning of these things have been lost, but it doesn't mean that they were meant to be obscure, because I see a lot of the narratives today, like, oh, this very mystifying and difficult painting was famous for this very complex allegory. They were not complex at the time. People could read it very, very well, and actually they were done for them. So
yeah.
There's lots of things like that in ballet, classical mime.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much more mime in our classical ballets.
Yes.
And the mime itself, most audiences today, if we start doing, the Crown, the King, you wouldn't know what we're talking about, most people.
Yeah, I remember learning mime when I was in ballet.
But originally, when that was done, it was actually to help the audience understand the narrative.
Yeah, very, very difficult, though. I remember learning mime as a classical dancer, and I was really trying to show that the person died, but I have no idea if the audience actually picked up on what I was trying to say.
Something did happen.
Yes, something dramatic happened. So coming back to this painting and this photograph of Suzanne Farrell performing as Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream, let's talk about the similarities, both Furio and Tamara, kind of that you see between the painting and the way that the ballet is performed, both in terms of choreography, but also, again, as we said, kind of in stage design.
I mean, Balanchine was very, very clear that he wanted the whole thing to be in the forest. He wanted the forest to be completely present, although, of course, for dance, the center part of the stage has to be free. So this constant tension from any design and any choreographer that they want to create a forest-like place, but also the trees cannot be on the stage. So, that's what he insisted, and that's what he got in his original production, the forest. And even in the second act, when you go into the court, the forest is still present. He insisted that the trees had to be part of the palace. So he was very focused on keeping the dream narrative throughout the ballet.
And then do you want to add in anything about Suzanne Farrell? Because this is probably one of the most significant dancers to have joined the New York City Ballet. And one of her earliest roles when she was around 16 years old was actually as Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
So Balanchine originally wanted to create A Midsummer Night's Dream to who was at the time his muse, Diana Adams. Balanchine had a habit of falling in love with unobtainable women. Diana Adams was married at the time. She had children already with her husband, but Balanchine pursued her relentlessly, although there's no evidence she never gave in. But he was also married. But he decided to create this ballet for her as this goddess of the fairies. And just as he started choreographing, she fell pregnant again. And so he ended up creating it for Melissa Hyden, who often stepped in when Diana was unavailable. But what happened also is that he asked this 16-year-old student from the School of American Ballet, his own school, to learn the role, and this was Suzanne Farrell. And she became the next goddess for him to obsess to. This another unobtainable religious virgin teenager, this ideal woman. He always fell in love with the ideal of a woman until he married them, and then they were no longer ideal.
And so it goes.
But this one escaped. But she did become his muse for many years, and he created some of the best works he ever created for her.
Suzanne Farrell.
And he famously saw himself as the donkey. And it's very telling that the most beautiful, tender pas de deux in the ballet is between the donkey and Titania. Just like when he did Don Q for her and she was Dulcinea, he was Don Quixote. He saw himself always, or he pretended to be always like under this spell of this unobtainable figure, unobtainable femininity.
Yes, very Balanchine. So let's talk a little bit about costumes as we wrap up our conversation. You mentioned the biography, Mr. B, Tamara, which is a fantastic biography about the life of George Balanchine by Jennifer Homans. And one of the things that I found through that book was really the importance of Barbara Karinska, who was an Oscar award-winning costume designer. Her longest relationship with one entity was with Balanchine for about, I believe, 4 decades. Yeah. But she also created costumes for theater, for opera, for ice spectacles, movies. You know, she was absolutely fantastic. And so these are some images of the original costumes that Karinska designed for A Midsummer Night's Dream. And costume is, for me, a very significant part of a ballet because it's what heightens your visibility of the movement, of the body, of lines. And dress is also so, I think, significant in many of the paintings that we've been looking at. So can you speak a little bit about the costumes for the original version, and if you feel they similarly are tied to Botticelli or the Renaissance period?
I mean, I think when you look at the ones on my right side of the screen, you see that there is a certain elements of the Renaissance when they are towards the characters that are supposed to be real, like the cross lovers, is more Renaissance. Obviously, then when we get to the idealized, like the Titanias, the fairies, it becomes more balletic, more tutu-like. I know that for this particular design, they had quite strong disagreements. They really struggled with the costume of Pac. Balanchine did not like the designs at all, and eventually the original Pac was Edward Villela, which was a black man, and he decided that Edward should just paint his skin with glitter. So Edward did Pac almost naked, as you can see, because he wanted him to feel like he was just part of the forest, like he was almost a creature that was just part of the tree and part of the forest. But I do think that since then we have presented other designs. The latest design, if you move forward a little bit more.
I'm sorry, everyone, I'm just skipping through.
Sorry, yes.
I think what inspired Karinska, it's not a literal, rendition of Botticelli or the Renaissance, but she took the palette from the painting, the light blues, the pinks, the white. So that was very much, I think, her thinking for.
Yeah, and these designs are the ones that we've used in the past by Martin...
Pacladinas. Pacladinas. I have a hard time with his last name.
Yes, me too, so thank you.
No problem, in 2020, yes.
I do feel that these are less successful in representing that palette of the Renaissance. And so this year we are presenting the designs by Christian Lacroix. Awesome. And I think Christian... being an extraordinary designer, really goes back to the original designs. much
Yep.
more. They are much more representative of the wishes of Balanchine. They are also more representatives of the Renaissance palette and designs. He designed them from Paris Opera. Paris Opera really only until recently didn't really perform Balanchine repertoire very much until Benjamin Millepied arrived. But he designed the version that they did in Paris a few years ago, I think 2017?
2017, yes.
Yes, for Paris Opera, and we are the first and I think only company that has managed to get it from the French.
Wow.
So we are very, very happy. But yes, Christian's designs are, I think, far more both respectful to the wishes of Balanchine and the original designs, but also to the Renaissance palette.
Yeah, he's a very cultured man,
Yes.
and as a fashion designer also, as you said, he worked for the opera, so he brings back that theatrical excess almost that was kind of stripped down in other rendition of the ballet. So I think the fashion, the costume are what makes the San Francisco new set even more interesting to watch.
And he also respected the wishes of, in the second act, the palace being also within the forest.
Right. So very true to Balanchine's original kind
Yes.
of conception of what he wanted the ballet to look like.
Yes.
So before we take some questions on some of the topics that we discussed today, we wanted to give you all a little sampling of what you will see next year. So this is not obviously the Christian Lacroix costumes, but it is in fact a video from San Francisco Ballet's last production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And what you're about to see is one of Titania's variations when she's in that very scene with the shell that seems very much taken right out of the Venus.
And if you think back at the nativity and the top of the nativity, I think this is a good representation of that.
Yeah. So let me get started here. Give me 1 second. So this was an excerpt from Sasha de Sola, who is one of the principal dancers at San Francisco Ballet, performing Titania, as I mentioned. And I think we saw a lot of similarities, actually, in particular with this snippet of the Nativity, but so many things that we spoke about. So before we wrap up, we wanted to open it up to a few questions. And I wanted to remind everyone that not only is this coming up in early 2024, but next week, San Francisco Ballet's Nutcracker is opening. So go get a taste of the ballet even before Midsummer Night's Dream.
Wednesday.
Did I not say on this coming Wednesday? So I will pass around a microphone for anyone who has questions. I just ask that if you could wait till you get the microphone to ask the question, because we have visitors who are watching online and they won't be able to hear you.
Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Great, yes.
My first question is for Furio. When you go to put this collection together and you get inspired to create Botticelli's drawings, at what point do you ask or reach out to Tamara for her kind of opinion or advice or her input? And then conversely, Tamara, when you hear this is being put together, do you take any inspiration and make any changes to your plan for Midsummer's Night Dream Ballet?
So I believe the question was, and correct me if I'm wrong, at what point in the process of preparing this exhibition did you think to reach out to Tamara? And Tamara, how did this exhibition impact her plans potentially for the ballet season or things like that? Kind of when does the communication between the two of you begin?
I reached out to Tamara as soon as she arrived. Can you hear me? Yes. As soon as she arrived, and I thought that Botticelli, I was already working on Botticelli. I've been working on this for the last 3.5 years. And I said, whatever you're going to do in your first season as artistic director, we're going to make it work with something about Botticelli and dance, because it was so intrinsic to his aesthetic that, and then when she came back with Balanchine and Midsummer's Night Dream, I said, okay, so that's really perfect. Yes.
Yeah, and to answer your question, preparing seasons takes 3 years, so we couldn't really react to each other because by then most of our plans were, but we are already talking about 25 and 26, so we will continue to find the way to link each other's work.
Great, and we are a little over time, so maybe only 2 more questions, if that's all right. One good question.
I'll try and do a good one. So given that ballet is so shaped around the female body, I'm curious about, for Botticelli, it feels like it's indicated in the show that the life drawings are all of male nudes, and I assume in the Renaissance you couldn't draw life drawings of women. So how do you think about that, given that that movement in the female body is so important in Renaissance art, but they couldn't actually sketch women?
That's a great question. Absolutely. In fact, all of Botticelli's studies that are reunited for the exhibition, figure studies, are after male nudes. They were workshop assistants most of the time posing for him. I think the female body is in fact idealization. There's an element of stylization, of abstraction that the male body doesn't have, that it's much more accurately portrayed. I think the classical antiquities and the sculptures of female nudes offer Botticelli a gateway to understand the female body for his composition, but it's always based, that is true not just for Botticelli, but if you think of Michelangelo, of Leonardo, even the female figures of his paintings, of the famous frescoes, are always based on male anatomical studies. So there's this interesting, it's a very intelligent and intelligent observation. It's in fact quite amazing that an artist that has become popular for his depictions of female nudes and female figure, in fact, never drew one. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, we talked a lot, and you didn't get to talk as much at the end, but thank you so much for being here today, for hearing this really exciting and illuminating conversation. And enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoon. Oh, thank you.